Hello, welcome to the end of the Iliad. Now, I'm sure you've read this already and are wondering, why does it end here? What is happening? Why didn't we end with the destruction of Troy, with the physical manifestation of the story arc? After all, every children's version, every other story you've probably read, ends with some sort of comprehensive tying together of all the loose ends. We don't end in the middle of the war. But Homer does. We leave off seemingly in the middle of the background story. Why are we stopping when there's still a war to be won and we don't get to see the end of the war or the end of Achilles or the end of Paris, which we would all love? What happens that Homer stops here? Go back to the beginning of the book, the first lines. What is this book about? It's about rage. It's about the rage of Achilles. And we see this throughout the book, the anger that Achilles holds, the way it makes him act, and the effect it has on the people around him. Because he's not just acting for himself. He is a prince, a leader. And so his choices affect the people around him. And we see how it also affects him, this tightening spiral of destruction that his anger causes, even as he tries to step out of this ridiculous honor system and say, well, wait a second, let's redefine what honor means. Let's figure out a new way because this clearly isn't working. Even when Hector so terribly kills Patroclus and gets credit for it as honor, but it wasn't honorable. So we see that there's something wrong with this system, and we see that Achilles is wrestling with what it means to be honorable, to be good, to live the good life. And yet, at the end, at the beginning of book 24, he is caught in this terrible cycle of sorrow and anger still. And even though it seems as though he sees the destruction he's causing, he cannot break out of it on his own. And this is where Priam and the gods come in. Priam has been given a message to go and ask for the body back, and he gathers his courage and he drives into the middle of the Greek camp and confronts the man who killed not just Hector, but several others of his children. And he kisses his hands, the hands of the murderer. This is one of the most poignant and heartbreaking moments in all literature. What must it take for a father to kiss the very hands that killed his son? And it's this gesture of love, this fatherly love, the outpouring that does something to Achilles. Achilles is kind of shocked. He stares at him as he would stare at a murderer, even though he himself is the murderer. And in a moment of grief, they both cry. They both sob and fill the tent with their cries. And then on page 149, two strange things happen. First, when Achilles had his fill of grief and the aching sorrow left his heart, he rose from his chair. Every reference we have to Achilles' heart up until this point calls it frozen, cold, iron. We have many instances of Achilles having an iron heart when he refuses to help his friends. He refuses to be flexible. But here we see his heart leaving sorrow. It is no longer in such great pain because he had this moment of connection with Priam, this moment of release. He looks upon the enemy. The enemy looks upon him and kisses his hand. He's offering him love. And that begins melting Achilles' cold iron heart. But then he speaks to Priam and he says, the suffering you've had and the courage to come here alone to the Greek ships and meet my eye, the man who slaughtered your many fine sons. You have a heart of iron. And we get the reversal here. This is the first time anyone other than Achilles is described as having a heart of iron. And when it's described of Achilles, it's usually a negative thing, not something great. But when it's Priam, when Achilles can recognize this courage, this fortitude in the fatherly king, when Achilles can have compassion for his enemy, his heart not only begins to heal, but he is able to recognize strength, the iron courage. And heart of iron becomes a good thing in Priam, that he has the strength and courage to reach out, to take this step towards his enemy for the sake of love. And through the rest of the book, we get this healing of Achilles' heart and to some degree Priam and the Trojans, as they're able to, as Achilles in particular, is able to look on his enemy and act for the good of someone else, and someone not just a friend whom he loves or his allies, but be able to act for the good of his enemy. And this is the growth of Achilles' heart, the growth of his soul, and the release of anger. Again, this is a story about anger, about rage. And so this is the end of Achilles' rage. This is the entire arc. It's not a story about the Trojan War. That's the background. It's a story about Achilles' soul. So let's bring it back to the discussion of virtue and what Plato says about the soul. Plato is writing quite a few hundred years after the Iliad, but he still uses the Iliad to illustrate his points about virtue and about fortitude in particular. Review: Plato says the soul has three parts: reason, spirit, and appetite, desire. And each of these parts corresponds to a part of the body, and it desires something. When it is well regulated, when it is aimed towards something good, it becomes a virtue. And when it is aimed towards something bad, it becomes a vice. So take a look at the spirit, the emotions. This is the desire for what Plato termed honor and victory. We might say self-worth, structure, ideas. And when it's well regulated, it becomes courage or fortitude. When it fails, it becomes anger, rage. And so, does Achilles have fortitude for the book when he's raging? Or is he only capable of true fortitude at the end? Is killing all of the people in those books his acts of courage? Is violence the way to honor? Or does he only have honor and fortitude when he is able to love his enemy, when he is able to take care of Priam, and even to some degree embrace the body of Hector? He has to lift Hector up to put him into the cart. And that kind of lifting is an embrace. He's almost hugging the body of Hector, whom he killed. Even though he says he hates him, he's offering him a gesture of love. Now, which of these three parts of the soul is in charge? Do they all work together equally? Do they all pull together equally? How do you decide which part of the soul should be in charge? Well, Plato has another analogy for that. He said that the mind and the body, the reason and the appetite, are the horses. They are pulling you towards a goal. But the soul, the spirit, the fortitude, is what directs the soul, directs everything else. Now, our closest metaphor comparison here is a car, and that doesn't really work because you don't have to have a relationship with a car to direct it where to go. But with this carriage, the driver has to have a relationship with the horses, and the horses have a will of their own. And when they all trust each other and work together, they can go very far, very fast in the right direction. Or if they're all fighting each other, things tend to get stymied and then you crash. Or even if they work well together, if they're being directed in the wrong direction, they end up completely obliterating themselves in a fiery crash of doom. So there has to be communication and working between all three parts of the soul. But there also has to be the spirit part directing you towards the right thing. Which asks the question then, what is the right thing? How is the soul directed towards the right thing? How do we avoid a crash? Plato believed that the poetics, or storytelling, was the best way to teach people how to rightly order their soul, how to direct your soul in the right path. And he uses the Iliad in this illustration. This is a story of Achilles and Hector trying to figure out how to direct their souls, how to control, to some degree, that entire chariot. And so then we have to ask, did Achilles have a right ordering of his soul? Did he have everything working together and heading in the right direction? What about Hector? What about Paris? What do you think? If they were not headed in the right direction at the beginning, where were they headed? What was wrong? For example, Hector. Hector seems to be good and noble and honorable, and then on multiple occasions, he fails. He falls either on the reckless side or the cowardly side of fortitude. And he has a hard time finding that middle. It's not until the very end where he gathers himself, and with the help of Athena and the encouragement of whom he thinks is his brother, he manages to steel himself to have a good ending. Can you be lost and then find your ending? Does it matter how you started if how you end is good, if you're ending in the right direction? And then how do they learn this? How do Achilles and Hector both learn how to control and rightly order their souls? How do they learn that direction to point themselves in? What happens with them? That is the real arc of this story. The Iliad has war in it, but it's the story of a soul and how it changes and grows and learns how to be in the right order. Everything seems jumbled about still. So when you look back on this book and the story of the soul, think, is there a clear answer to how to live life, how to order a soul? Are these characters, Achilles, Hector, Priam, Agamemnon, Odysseus, do they have the right ordering? And if they don't have at the beginning, are they redeemed by the end of the book? Are they able to direct their soul chariot in the right direction? But more important than this is, what is the effect of the Iliad on your soul? If Plato said that stories shape souls and teach you how to correctly direct yours, did the Iliad have an effect on you? It should. The books we have here are good because they have an effect on our soul, even if it's something as simple as loving the right even more or hating the bad. If you have grown at all, if your love for something good has been strengthened or your hatred for bad has been strengthened in this book at all, then this book has affected you in a good way. I hope that this clears up the end of the book and helps you continue on in your studies. Good luck.